Hi, Shweta. Thank you so much for doing this. As we've spoken, the idea for this podcast is to talk to the number of many accomplished women that have passed out from IIMA and learn about the very different journeys that everybody's been on. And through that, create very relatable role models for women like me who've been very recent graduates. So that's literally it. But thank you so much for taking out the time to do this.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really like the idea of relatable role model because um, it's interesting for me to even think of myself as one. But yeah, so very happy to be here. Very happy to be
Awesome. So just kicking right in,
here.
I know a lot of people are also going to go to your LinkedIn after this,
Yeah,
right? If you just go by everything on LinkedIn, you got such an interesting journey. I was seeing that you did your undergrad actually in microbiology,
that's right.
and then you moved on to IIMA. Then you worked, I think, in data science for a bit, market
Yeah,
insights. You've been a multiple time over founder.
that's right.
And now you yourself are working on storytelling. So
That's right.
what's driven you across this, which seems on paper like a zigzag kind of journey, but I'm sure there was, what has been driving you?
So it is. You're right. It's an interesting journey at best. It's very very interesting. I've had a very interesting life. Been very fortunate to have led a very interesting life. But if you see the themes that sort of connect through that entire thing, if I were to quickly talk about all the things, of course, I did my undergrad in microbiology, and we'll talk about why I did microbiology and at various points in time how I got into IMA was quite fascinating as well because honestly I was not interested in IMA. My brother is an IMA grad. Uh, I have a cousin who was a prof, so it didn't really hold the same aura for me. But nonetheless, at some point in my graduation, I realized, science was like pure science was not going anywhere in India. So it was just really serendipity. My brother said, you really should do this, and I went because I got admission. It was really as simple as that. I wish I had thought through that a little bit more, gotten more work ex, etc. Before I did, but it was not a well thought through decision. I got admission, I went. It was really that simple. But post IMA, couple of things happened. One was obviously the fact that I was a microbiology student got me into healthcare very early.
Okay.
So I started my career with Ranbaxy Laboratories, right? Thereafter, after Ranbaxy, and we'll again talk about that later, I did that only for 4 months because I discovered very early on that the large company culture was very suffocating to me. I couldn't really relate to that. Uh, so thereafter, I actually joined a startup in Bombay back in '99 in the middle of the dot-com boom. I was a second employee for a startup called Tata Internet Services Limited, where I was building a women's portal. So I was in charge of building a women's portal there. Uh, I worked with them for 2.5 years, moved to the US, took a gap year, traveled in the US for a year, uh, traveled to 17 states, volunteered, came back. Then the next decade spent in healthcare data science or healthcare consulting in whatever format across two firms, um, MarketRx and IQVIA. And in both, again, what is common here is actually I joined MarketRx. It was a young startup at that point in time, and now actually the founder has formed this other company called Axtria. It's the same guy. He sold MarketRx off to Cognizant in 2007, 2008. But when I joined, they were just starting out in India. So the theme there was, again, I was an early team member there, right? And then I was also a trailing spouse. So I was doing all of these things while sort of balancing a marriage, family, etc. And my husband obviously was also kind of building his career at that point in time. So I moved to Thailand with IQVIA. Again, there, we'll talk about how I got that job, but again, the role there was building out their consulting practice. It was starting something from scratch, right? And after that, I was then doing the traditional. After that role, the next role was actually the least satisfying for me, where I had the title, the car, the chauffeur, the P&L, all of that, but damn boring. So I kind of quit that. So, I did that and then I sort of quit that. And then I had three companies of my own. The first again, set up in Thailand in decor, which was just me trying to kind of, I was just sick and tired of healthcare, too much of left brain. And I had a great friend, and we used to, like, Southeast Asia is fantastic for, home decor. So it was a hobby of mine, and I had a close friend who was an architect. So and I was also looking at something that was less intense because the corporate career there had been pretty intense, and I had a young child, so I want to focus on my family. But I didn't want to do nothing, so I sort of built that company out over the next 4 years. Had a lot of fun doing it. Moved back to India. Uh, so because of the move, sort of shut that down. Um, Built another company in in physiotherapy at home out of Pune.
Yeah.
Built that for 3 years. Actually lost that company to my co-founder. Got cheated out of everything. Moved to Bombay,
Yeah.
and then again consolidated this long hobby of mine in writing into my third startup, my third company.
And that's, I mean, so the connecting theme that I'm seeing is very much, being driven by interest, right? That this is what
Yeah.
interests me right now, this is what keeps me going, and this is what I want to do, right? And I think it's very inspiring for somebody like me to kind of look at it, because traditionally you only hear about, you have to put interest on the back burner, and you have to think about what makes sense for you and your career, right? And you have to think about, okay, this is what this person did 10 years in this role and this role and this role, and that's how you kind of grow. But it's, I mean, for me, it's very inspiring to see that you can actually, I mean, rubbish all of that thought. Just
See, you have to be true to yourself and your own personal DNA, right? I think if I was a different sort of person, I would have probably done that linear career track as well. But to me, my life was always a lot more than uh, being a slave to a job.
yeah,
And recognizing very early on that what drove me and what gave me satisfaction. It's actually very interesting. One of my early bosses had an insight about me, like, you're the kind of person who'll do really well when you enjoy what you're doing, and you're shit when you're really bad when you're not enjoying it. And that's actually 100% true, right?
yeah,
So I can't do things that I don't like.
hmm,
I'm incapable of it. So I have to find things that I like, because I switch off very quickly if it's something that's not engaging me.
yeah, yeah,
So I've always pursued interest. I've always pursued passion. I've always sort of created opportunities for myself when really none existed in that ecosystem, because that's what I wanted to do at that point in time.
yeah,
So I've done that, and I've always tried to fit that in with the in the context of the rest of my life at that point in time. So it was always trying to also balance, what else is going on in my life, what else is important. So it's never been in some sense purely career led as a life.
hmm,
It's not been a life where I've said that my career is so important that nothing else matters.
hmm,
And so yeah, that's also been a very strong theme of mine, that uh, I've always done something. I've always been very productive. I've always like done great work,
hmm.
but it's never been. It's always been on my own terms, so to speak. Right.
Wow. So just going from that into now, you obviously you spoke about how interest in wanting to do what you want to do is has been like a driving force, right? But I'm sure along with that, of course, there were a bunch of things that led to those decisions happening, right? So if you
Mhm.
want to talk about, say, the most important inflection points, so to speak, right? What has kind of led you to where you are now?
Mhm.
What would some of those points be? Maybe if you can do like the top three or something.
I think the first inflection point has to be professionally, right? Um, Quitting my corporate job at Ranbaxy and deciding to join a startup in the first place. Now, this is, you're talking 1999, where startups were not coming to campuses. There were no unicorns. There was very little funding, and it was not the cool thing to do.
Hmm.
Okay, it was a stupid thing to do.
Hmm.
Right. So it was not where people IIMA grads went to make careers back in 1999, right? So I think that would surely be the first inflection point, because it sort of opened the doors to a new way of being for me. And it taught me that I enjoy building stuff from scratch. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
uh, that was something that I learned in that sort of in that sort of piece.
Mm.
Um, I think the second sort of, I don't know if you can call it inflection point, but the second themes was two times when I was thrown out of the country without sort of a safety net. Because in both times, actually, when I moved from for the first time after marriage to the US, uh, I did have the option of sort of moving into TCS and going with
Yeah.
TCS as the safe sort of thing, you know, and it didn't appeal to me, so I chose not to do that, right? And the same thing when I moved again to Thailand, I was already doing work from home for Market RX. I'd already sort of created that policy for myself, and I was already doing work from home for 2+ years at that point in time, almost 1.5, 2 years. So
Mm.
they said, what's the difference? You can sort of continue to do that out of Thailand. How does it matter?
Yeah.
I was just bored of work from home. So I told them that it's unlikely that I'm going to come back,
Mm.
but they were very generous to give me sort of a long leave.
Mm.
And then again, going and finding my feet in a brand new country. And both of these places, there was no IIMA brand to sort of fall back on, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So I think, therefore, I had to like really learn to hustle. I had to learn to network,
Yeah.
you know. I had to learn to put myself in front of leaders and people and CEOs and have conversations. And I think those have been lifelong skills. Now, funnily, when I now, like last year as well, you know, when I was in between, before I started Build My Story,
Yeah.
when I go and talk to people, I'm obviously now part of leadership teams, and the biggest skill that I bring to the table is this, that, and I didn't acquire it in a job, you know.
Yeah.
That my ability to build networks, or sort of, you know, my sort of networking skill, though I've always been relationship oriented, the hardcore networking sort of skill got built in periods when I was actually looking for work, you
Mm.
know. So these got built outside of my work. So and that's been a very strong theme. I mean, in terms of learning to hustle, learning to kind of, that was an important sort of turning point.
Yeah.
And the third very important inflection point was, you know, being from IIMA, the goal is always sort of, you know, the vertical career track. So for
Yeah.
very long, I was sort of aspiring towards the vertical career track as well.
Yeah.
So when I was in IQVIA in Thailand, and I was the commercial director, I was doing really well. I'd won an award, and you know, I was doing really well. And obviously, going down that path would have led me to the country manager role. It would have led me to a regional role. It would have given me all the so-called perks, titles, all of that.
Mm.
But looking at that job, how my boss, the CEO or the country manager, spent his time
Mm.
on a day-to-day basis, it was just so boring. It was just so it just so uninspiring for me, that then that making that decision to sort of leave that vertical track behind
Mm.
was, and was again obviously a very big inflection point, because it was a big decision for me. I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs.
Mm.
I don't come from you know, nobody in my ecosystem, my parents, nobody in immediate family. Though I grew up in Gujarat and obviously was inspired by the entrepreneurship in the neighborhood, it was never in my home. It was never something that
Your
was
access.
okay. It
Yeah.
was never something that, like, my mom was really upset when I quit my job, you know, because for her that whole title and the car and the perks and all of that was like really big for her. It was like, how would you give that up to do nothing this, you know? So I think that sort of accepting that, you know, that was not giving me happiness, that track was not giving me happiness, and that, I think that was the other sort of major inflection point.
Mm.
And then having the courage to start something on my own, small or big, in a foreign country without, you know. So that was the next inflection point.
Mm.
And the last one I would think is around the time of starting Build My Story, which is accepting what, you know, again leaving one more sort of baggage behind of, because when I was building Helios, the physiotherapy at home startup,
Yeah.
I wanted to do what an IIMA grad is supposed to do, which is, you know, get funding, build a scalable startup, you
Mm.
know, build a big giant company and all of that.
Yeah.
But I think recognizing that scale to me is doing fantastic work and being known as an expert at what I do.
Mm.
is what matters to me. And I would rather build like a small sustainable agency or a small business
Mm.
in terms of, and slowly at my own pace, rather than that, that breakneck VC sort of thing.
Yeah.
And learning to accept that for myself and say that, this is what gives me happiness and this is what I want.
Yeah.
So I think those would be the broad sort of uh, turning points in my life that have sort of gotten me here.
Great. And they're all, I mean, it's almost like, I mean, I'm not surprised you started Build My Story because it all sounds so well, like threaded together, right? That you went through all of these phases, and obviously different phases lead to different decisions. So it's amazing to see that anything you really do in your life, if you're driven by that one theme, can lead you to where you are supposed to be.
Hmm.
As Paulo Coelho, as I'm sounding right now, but
Yeah.
but let's talk about, when you decided that you wanted to start this venture, and you've spoken a little bit about it right now, where it was a difficult decision because family found it tough to accept. It wasn't the norm maybe at that time to kind of do it. IIMA grads weren't supposed to kind of go down that route. Were you like, what made you take that specific decision? And what was your thought process at that time?
See, there were many things happening in my life at that point in time, to be honest, right? I think when I quit, as with a lot of my decisions, it was a little bit of an impulse. I'd been unhappy at work for a while.
Mm.
I could see where that career was going. I could see there would be more money, there would be a bunch of things, but I was not happy. I think that was the underlying. In fact, I was clinically depressed. You
Mm.
know, so I was clinically depressed because I wasn't getting joy at work. The intensity of that pace
Mm.
was causing a lot of angst in my personal life. Uh, and all of that put together as a path was not something that, as much as I had dreamed about it, as anybody who gets out of IMA does, saying, I'll have this title, I'll be a regional head, I'll do this, I'll do that. I think um, a lot of personal factors essentially. It was just driven by the fact that I was in a space where it was just not adding up. It
Yeah.
was not making sense for me, and I had also been on the fence. Being part of startup teams for a while by then. I had built companies for other people by then,
Yeah.
and it was also this whole thing that I'm going to be 35, and when am I going to have the courage to sort of jump ship, give up the safety net of that steady paycheck,
Yeah.
and do something on my own. So it was also that. It was also, a sense of, I've done this for other people now. I've done this. I've been in 3 different companies. I've built businesses. I know how to do this. But what's holding me back? So I think it was, like I said, a bunch of personal factors along with this whole thing of, how long am I going to like not take the plunge? How long am I going to sit on the fence?
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, and that's so you basically, I mean, and I feel like I resonate with that as well when you say that, it was a little bit of impulse and a little bit of if not now, then when. But once you kind of started, right, and you've been on this journey with like many different startups and all in broadly like different spaces. Of course, like building a startup from that 0 to 1 journey broadly looks the same as well, but
no, it doesn't actually. They're all completely different businesses and they all do completely different things. The first was a product business, and it required like, building a vendor network,
yeah.
traveling across the country and building a vendor network and learning about exports and managing cash flows and managing, working capital,
Hmm.
because it's a very capital intensive business because your decor products. So working around cash flow rotation and some of those. So the principles that you sort of used in that business were
Different.
pretty
Hmm.
pretty distinct in its own format.
Yeah.
In the second business, it was a services play. It was physiotherapy at home. So then again, there it was entirely about capacity utilization. The critical success factor there was, to compete in that market, you always had to be, you had to ensure that, it was a tricky balance of sort of how many people do you have, matching demand and supply so that you're always sort of
Yeah.
not in the red. You're always sort of at a per unit cost basis. You're at least sort of making money from a services perspective.
Yeah.
So the fundamental, and each of them had like different critical success factors. One was about obviously differentiating from a product story perspective. The other was differentiating from a service and service training, and entirely different businesses. And this is completely different again because this is a B2B sort of, and this is sort of marketing in its own sense, right? But it's been fascinating and interesting for me because each of these businesses have given me very, very different perspectives and very different skills. And I've enjoyed all of them in very different ways, right? And it's that at the end of the day, I think I always look back and I say, I've had a very good time doing all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I can't think of anybody who's done like such different startups and like kind of gone broad range, and now it's all kind of adding up with what you're doing at Build My Story as well, right? Which kind of brings me to my next question, which is storytelling itself, right?
Yeah.
How have you seen that? Because obviously, I mean, it's something that you consider important. But how do you think that has made the difference for great leaders, and what have you seen in your experience so far that's really changed things for you, for other people that you work with?
So I think before we sort of get into storytelling itself, I think one of the things I get a lot of leads on a weekly basis. I talk to a lot of people, right? And most of the time, people are confused about what is story. I
Hmm.
think I think it's important to sort of, and it's now a buzzword, and I've just sort of ended up being the right place at the right time, and everyone's talking about storytelling, 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 right? Um, I think, uh, I think I like to define story as something. It's a powerful narrative that essentially has four things going for it, right?
Hmm.
One is it's lucid, so it's very clear, it's simple, right? The second is it's engaging, so the other person is sucked into what you're saying.
Hmm.
Okay. The third is it's very visual,
Hmm.
right? You can actually visualize what the other person is saying completely,
Yeah.
right? And the fourth thing is, wait, I've made notes here. Emotional, right? And that's how it's different from a case study or something else. Is that a story always has an emotional sort of element to it, right?
Yeah.
These are the four key elements that sort of differentiate a story from other forms of communication.
Yeah.
And why is it sort of, now let's look at each of these four things, right? Why is it important for a leader or for anyone else? When you speak lucidly or clearly, the other person understands what you says, right? So it's simple. So simplicity obviously gets people in. When you use jargon, when you use paradigm shifts, and you use these big jargons, you lose people because people don't understand what you're saying, right? So
Yeah.
that's very simple. Engaging is the most powerful element of story, because in order to get people to change hearts and change minds and decide along with you, they need to get sucked into your story.
Right.
And that is really, in marketing terms, about understanding your customer, right? It's understanding what this audience really wants, what engages them. So
Hmm.
it's really customer research, right?
Hmm.
So when you choose a particular theme or an example, you're always trying to understand what connects to this person, right?
Yeah.
So that is what is engaging.
Hmm.
Why is it visual? When you think back about anything you remember, it's not a string of words. It's a series of images in your head. It's a reel, right? Because if you think about your dreams, it's not a string of words. It's a reel. So when it's visual, it is more memorable, right? That's what it's saying. And emotion. Why is emotion important? Emotion is important because now neuroscience tells us that any decision that we make, any decision has an emotional element to it, right? So it could be a purely emotional decision around your personal life or etc.
Hmm.
Even a work decision where you're making a multi-million-dollar sort of deal and you're evaluating specs and you're doing all of that. At the end of the day, it's human beings making a decision, and those human beings are swayed by human reasons. There's a gut feel they look for trust, they look for other factors. So it is that, right?
Yeah.
So these are the core key elements, and when a leader deploys it, uh, what are the benefits that they get? I mean, you've seen around you. You see, I like to think of, how Satya Nadella used Hit Refresh as a book to sort of rebrand entire Microsoft. in his image, right? So he was able to, and it started. If you've read the book Hit Refresh, it's not really about Satya Nadella's life. It's really about, the company and the various businesses, and how his tenure in all of these various businesses. But what resonates with most people is that first chapter where he talks about his son, and he talks about a personal story there about having a child with disability and then sort of managing that. And that just gives a very human angle to the person, and that gives a very human angle to the company, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you think about any sort of big business leader today, uh, who's like Steve Jobs, very, very, people resonate with the guy. I mean, the entire sales of the company, they just such a strong, when he was alive, he was an icon. And that was because of how open he was about his life, about how he used story in his own life, right? To kind of buy customers. So you look at any really successful leader, storytelling is an integral part of what they do, right? And what are the benefits out of it? It's obvious. It's they're more relatable. You trust them more, right? You
Yeah.
think they're more competent when they tell stories. When you tell stories of work, when you talk about, I did this and this is, even when you're talking about failure at work, you come across more competent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it makes people sound more competent. And when you tell stories internally to your internal, say your teams, you're able to get buy-in more easily. Instead of say you make a presentation about facts, people are going to argue facts. They're going to be this way or that way about it. But when you kind of wrap it up in a customer case study or a human story element to it,
Yeah.
you're going to move people more. You're going to get buy-in. It's easier to get buy-in to your decisions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And externally, of course, when leaders tell stories, people want to work for them. So Tesla, take Elon Musk. Everybody dies to work for Tesla, right? You attract more customers. If you're a B2B business, you get better customers, right? And if you're an entrepreneur, you're able to raise funding. Take Kunal Shah, take a bunch of these guys on LinkedIn today. They just raise a lot of money when they tell stories,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And finally, if you're just a corporate executive, more job opportunities for you. Because you have a personal brand fundamentally, right? So you're able to,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that it all makes sense, and I love the way you kind of tied it up in those 4 points of what constitutes a powerful narrative, because you don't really think of narrative and you don't really break it down, but you're absolutely right. It does have all of those elements like checking boxes, and only then people are able to think of someone as a great cultish kind of leader. Awesome. From there to your personal kind of journey as well, right? What are some of the greatest challenges that you faced in your career? And if we were to kind of put a gender lens on this as well, something that if there's something that you would want to highlight from that perspective as well.
So I thought about this question because you had, sent me those questions earlier upfront as well.
Yeah.
And so I think there's one, because I think how recent it is, and I don't know if it has a gender lens, but certainly I would think that the challenge that I struggled to sort of recover from the most was certainly sort of losing my startup or sort of walking away from that company. And not having, say, I walked away without equity or money, and it was just, so I worked for 3 years, built the company out, made it really successful, and then got nothing in return. So I think coping with that was probably, I mean, for a very long time, I couldn't even talk about what I did well at the company because I felt like a failure. So I think personally, I think that would be the biggest sort of, I mean, that took me a long time to recover from. Uh, does it have a gender lens to it? I thought about that as well. And I think it did, in that the reason why that happened to me in hindsight and sort of, talking about it and thinking about it, was I was very underconfident of what I brought to the table, and I had huge imposterism issues. So I was a very poor negotiator. I was an extremely poor negotiator, and I was willing to be trampled upon to get to do what I really love to do, you know. So I do think women tend to be poorer negotiators and tend to have greater imposterism issues than men do. So from that perspective, it certainly had a gender lens to it.
Yeah.
But and but did it happen to me because I was a woman? No, I think it would have happened to anyone, right?
Mm.
But it did teach me about the price that I pay for carrying around for imposterism. It
Mm.
was a very, very large price I had to pay to sort of wake up and then sort of work through those issues to sort of uh,
Yeah.
move past that.
Yeah.
But so that would be, I would think, the biggest.
Yeah.
And the second one does have a gender lens to it, but again, it was entirely my choice. Was sort of pushing forward and staying relevant while being a trailing spouse. Because
Mm.
I've moved, I think, post my marriage 6 times, 6 cities,
Yeah.
right? And so yeah, so that is challenging to sort of continue to keep a career alive. And I tried to marry entrepreneurship with that, which is not really the best combination as well, right?
Mm.
Uh, Having said that, I think there are enough of us who kind of choose not to be trailing spouses and who have the option of saying that my spouse can go wherever he likes, but we're going to have a long distance marriage, and I'm going to kind of.
Yeah.
But I chose not to do that because it didn't sort of fit in well with what I wanted for the rest of my life.
Mm.
So but that did cause a lot of angst in the years that I was dealing with it. It did cause a lot of angst, and it was sort of each time going into a new place, getting certainly these inter-country moves, getting new opportunities, finding a job,
Yeah.
even within the same job, moving cities, sometimes giving up a promotion because you're living in a different city. Because work at home was not so common back in 2004 when I was doing it, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so those kind of so broadly under the sort of thing of trying to stay relevant and trying to ensure that not giving up and continuing to have a career
Mm.
while being also a trailing spouse. So I think that those would be my top two sort of
Challenges.
um, challenges. There have been others that most women face. There has been, I think, one issue of sexual harassment and a bunch of others. But I don't know if either of them had as much of an impact on me personally as both of these, right?
Got it. And I mean, what I'm taking away is also the frame that you're putting these things in, right? Because not to take away obviously from the issue, but I mean, what I am kind of taking away personally is the fact that you can face these challenges, understand why maybe maybe gender played a role, maybe whatever else played a role into it. But I mean, what's important is how you then deal with it, and then how you process it, and then how you move on from there. So
Mhm.
that's, I mean, that's a very refreshing way to kind of talk about it. Yeah. Um, and moving from there to also, what do you consider your greatest achievement so far? And this could be professional, personal, I mean, whatever that you felt has been something that you've really killed at.
So I actually killed it almost everything I've done. But having said that, I mean, having said that, I think the way I like to look at that, Garima, is that I've actually put that into sort of four different buckets,
Mm.
right? Out of which one of which is work, right? So the number one thing to me was probably self.
Mm.
So my relationship with myself, right? And I think I have built over the years a very, very strong relationship with myself, right? And what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that I'm constantly evolving, I'm constantly reflecting, I'm constantly growing as a human being. I'm acquiring new skills, I'm killing demons, I'm building new habits. It's something that I'm obsessive about, right? So in terms of my own relationship with myself, I think I have a very, very strong one. And I think that to me is probably my, you know, certainly among my top achievements, right? So that's something that, and I cherish that a lot. I really cherish that element of myself. The second is the wealth of relationships that I've invested in and built, right? I've always been a relationship person. I've always been sort of someone who loved people. But through this whole journey of whatever, I've managed to sort of. I'm proud of the fact that I've like I've built a solid relationship with my spouse, a very supportive, mutually sort of supportive relationship. I have a fantastic relationship with my teenage daughter. We're friends. A great relationship with my parents. I've invested in that. And I have friends going back to high school, practically every city and every place that I've lived in. I have friends from that place. And I've never been through a crisis that I didn't have five people to turn to ask, how should I deal with it? So I've had a wealth of relationships that have supported me through life, and I think that's something that I'm exquisitely proud of, because sometimes when you become uni focused, you can lose that, you
Yeah.
can lose that, and so for me that has been very, very important. The third one is I've not done as much, but it's community. It's something that I've always, at least for the last 7 8 years, I've always been very active in giving back in some form or fashion. So while in Pune, I was running the Pune Alumni Chapter. Uh, I was the founding moderator of the WIM group. I did that for a few months.
Yeah.
I am currently organizing a health tech conference for the healthcare SIG.
Yes.
I volunteer my time with child sexual abuse. So, so I'm constantly giving back in small ways, in whatever way. So I think that sort of completes me as a person. And finally, coming back to the main sort of thing is, what am I most proud about at work? So obviously, I've had my share of accomplishments where I've won awards and I've done a bunch of different things, right? And I've grown professionally, I've built successful businesses and all of that. But I do think what gives me the greatest kick is that at every point in my career,
Yeah.
I've actually created a road when there was none, you know. I've actually, so when I joined Market RX, for instance, when I went to the US and I came back, this was a company that was only hiring engineers and stats people, right? And I actually knocked on their doors and said, "You must hire me because I'm the only one here who understands your business. I've been a pharmaceutical sales rep." So I actually broke their hiring code for them to hire me. They were not looking at engineers. They were not looking at non-engineers and non-math people. And I was terrible at math. I got a D in stats, and I'm horrible at math. But I built a career in data really by data storytelling. I always understood what stories the data was
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
saying. So in some sense, doing that. And then at every point in time, be it my work from home, we're creating a brand new policy for the company, moving to a new country and networking my way into a job. And I was very stubborn that I wanted to be in healthcare and I wanted to be in healthcare data and consulting. And there would have been probably one job in that country at that point in time. And I got that, So, but it took me a while to get there. And interestingly, the reason they even IQVIA hired me was that in that year of sort of looking for work, I had met on my own some 4 or 5 different CEOs through my network and just hustling my way through stuff. And their team had not been able to get time with CEOs on their own. So the reason they sort of wanted to take me in was, she's able to get senior management time. So that's how I was kind of became a salesperson there as well,
Yeah.
heading out and building out the strategy practice and so that, and then of course building a company in a foreign country. Okay, recovering from the failure of losing my startup. Okay, so all of these things I'm exquisitely proud about, exquisitely proud about. So obviously work wise there's been a lot as well, but I think those are tactical. I think this is what I'm sort of
Yeah.
most proud about. Yeah.
Awesome. And from there to our last segment, right? One is your time at IIMA and what you kind of think back to from then, and then your advice to women who are, starting their journey in the entrepreneurship space. What is your take on those two things?
See, my time at IMA is, I mean, at the outset, I have to say that I'm hugely grateful for it, right? Because back in the day, when I went to undergrad, there was no sort of career path for a pure science BSc sort of person, right? Nowadays undergrads get hired as well, but back in the day, undergrads really had no. BSc degree really didn't count for much. Um, So I think it did sort of change the trajectory of my life in every way possible, right? In terms of giving me a career, a life, a financial security. It gave me, and changed the way I think, the way it changed everything. So it was a career. It was a trajectory shifting sort of experience for me. Having said that itself, and this is something I've blogged about, Garima, as well, that my time itself in IMA was a very difficult one. Right? It was very difficult because I came underprepared. I was not sure what to expect, right? And I struggled actually. I struggled quite a bit at IMA. What I did take away from that space was, of course, my relationships. I built some very solid friendships who are still there in my life even today.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, and unknowing to me, I obviously learned that process of thinking that IMA kind of makes, it seeps into your DNA about, holistic thinking and learning to look at a business holistically. So I sort of acquired that as well. And yeah, so I think that's what sort of I took away from IMA. It gave me the confidence, I think, to kind of do anything, right? I mean, I've done really vastly different things,
Yeah.
and I think at many levels, it's sort of strangely it gives you the confidence. It's an insurance policy, so you can always sort of bank on
That's
it,
a good way to put it.
right? So you can do crazy shit, and you will still, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and go back to at least some job. It may not be the world's best job, and you may not get, but you will always get something with an IMA degree. So I think it's a fantastic insurance policy. Uh, I think that's also something that
Yeah.
I do that. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you had to advise young women who are, say, graduating from IMA right now or choosing to make that switch, what would you advise them to do?
What switch? The entrepreneur switch.
To entrepreneurship, yeah.
For women who are graduating out of IMA, I don't know what I have to say. I'll think about that a little bit in a couple of minutes. But for the women who want to become entrepreneurs, I actually wrote that down. There were 5 things I wanted to kind of tell them.
Go for it. Yeah.
And so I think the very first thing is, I think, and I've seen some of my friends make that mistake as well, is that I think be financially secure before you start,
Yeah.
right? So it could be because you have a good family background, or is it because you have a safety net, or whatever it is, but be financially secure, because it's easier to dream on a full stomach and a roof over your head than if you have to worry about where your next EMI is going to come from.
Balls of wisdom dropping from every sentence. I'm going to make these.
Yeah, because there is so much. It's a very stressful journey by itself, and you don't want to deal with it
Yeah.
with having other things to worry about. So I would think that would be number one, like very clearly. So that's why I think when I started my very first thing at 35, we were already financially secure. We had both worked for a decade, and I knew that if I quit and I did sort of wild things, we would never be on the streets because of it. So I think I started. So to me, at least to me, I'm conservative like that, and I think that was probably the number one thing, right?
Yeah.
The second is, I think, make failure your friend, right? I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have so many setbacks, so many rejections, so much, so many ups and downs in that journey, that how you deal with that failure, how you process it, will define if you sort of make it to the next level or not, right? Whether or not you learn from it, how you process that failure is very important. So make failure your friend. Assume that you're going to fail, and move on. Learn to move on. It's difficult, but learn to move on, right? So I think that's an important one. Um, the next thing that I want to say is, define scale for yourself, right? Um, that's something I learned the hard way as well. Define what success as a word means to you, right? And as much as the world tells us to sort of follow the line, and there's sort of a singular definition of success, what success means to you personally could actually be very different. So it took me a long time to discover, but my personal definition of success is really resilient joy. I want to live a life that's wholesome, fulfilling, and joyful. That to me is success, right? So chase your success, and chase. And when you're building a company, figure out what scale it is that you want, not what the world expects from you, you know. And if that scale for you means building a unicorn, sure, go ahead and build it. But if it doesn't mean building a unicorn, don't kill yourself doing it. You can do 100 other things and you can still be happy and successful and do everything else, right? So I think that would be that. And wait, there are a couple of more. Let me just. Uh, yeah, get lots of help. Uh, get lots of help. Have many conversations. Get mentors. Get advisors. Have a network of peers you can bounce off. Get coaches. Um, it's a very lonely journey if you're a solo founder for sure. And so get help from every place that you can get it. Ask for it, get it, right? And the fifth for entrepreneurs is certainly just stop thinking and just do it. There's only so much swimming you can learn from the shore. You just have to jump in. You're never going to learn everything up front. You're going to pivot 100 times. You're going to sort of, discover things that you could not have planned for at any point in time. So you just have to swim in and learn to swim the tide. So that's what you have to do. So I think those would be the 5 things I would sort of tell women who want to be entrepreneurs or anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. For women, IIMA, women who graduate out of IIMA, I know I found it to be a hugely intimidating place. I was very intimidated by it. And a friend of mine, a batchmate of mine, actually told me something that I didn't quite process then, but the truth of it has sort of become evident to me. That by your very virtue of getting into IIMA, you're already in the 99.9 percentile of this country, right? So be kind to yourself, essentially. Remember that you're already, by being there, you're already amongst the smartest in this country. So never forget that. Sometimes it's easy to forget that when you're surrounded by people who are much smarter than you and much more successful than you and all of that. But remember that you're already there. So just accept that. So I think that's the only thing I would tell women getting out of IIMA.
That's. I don't even want to talk and ruin the rest of this because I just feel like the last 2 minutes of you talking it just reads like an article. I mean, amazing. But I think, just makes a lot of sense. I know I have got a lot of clarity from this talk as well. So thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure speaking to you. And yeah.
The pleasure's all mine, Garima. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.